That's all I've got on that side. So happy notes. Does anybody have a happy note that they would like to let us know about? Karen, and then Andy.
I got a new printer today.
Full of ink, ready to go?
My other one died. So yes, I have a new HP 6400 printer.
Good luck.
Now I have to read the owner's manual to find out how to work it.
And some of those you can just do it. You don't even have to plug in from your computer.
Yeah. Well, that
Good luck.
wasn't quite that easy, I don't think.
Andy, hit your mute. Got to hit your mute, Andy. Are you coming?
There.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay. I'm working with two screens and sometimes it's not too easy. Yeah, that I missed the last start of the last meeting because I had the Karen's problem. I have to find the last email that you sent regarding the meeting, and sometimes it takes a long time to find it if it's way down the line. So I appreciate those days when you send the email in the morning, repeat the email in the morning, the meeting, and then all I got, it's right there, you hit it, and that goes. But anyway, what I wanted to say was a week ago Saturday, my grandson in British Columbia got married. So that's the first member of that generation that has got married. And the wedding was, we were there by virtue, by the tube. And the wedding was actually in a, it was in a provincial park, about halfway between Vancouver and Whistler. And the snow must have been 3 feet deep. And there they were out, they had a little thing set up, and probably 10 or 15 people would be the most that would be around. But it was sure different, but it's an event to have a grandson married for the first time. So that was
For the first time.
And the other, well, yeah, for the first time, yeah. Well, who knows?
Sorry.
The other good news that I have, most of you know that I have a little problem walking sometimes, and last week I got a new pair of foot drop things to put on my feet, so maybe I'll be able to walk better when I can walk, certainly can walk better on them, but I haven't got quite used to them yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anybody else with some good news for us?
Les
Herman, we want to hear something good from you.
I watched bingo last night.
Yeah, but I understand you didn't get the right numbers called.
Apparently not, but I hadn't watched the show before, so it was different to see it.
A little different from that side, eh?
Yeah.
I was hoping for another report.
Yeah. So, well, I haven't heard anything yet, but I'm on lockdown, right, or isolation, I guess, till next Monday.
All right, well, good luck with that. My good news is my wife has gone back to work. Or is heading back to work. So after being retired for 3 years, she's starting to gear up for being part of the vaccination team. So you might run into her at some point in the Bradley Center, I think is what they're working towards.
Good.
So if you haven't got a job these days, I guess somebody has to have the income, so that's good.
Yeah.
So I actually got my COVID vaccine, the first one yesterday, and and then I go back again at the end of March. So just in case you're wondering why I got it, I've been volunteering at RVG on the weekend to help feed residents. So at first I was like, no, I shouldn't be. And they said, well, no, because you're volunteering in a long-term care home. You're on one of the first. So yeah. And then the other news is my dad had successful cataract surgery this morning. So, which is why I was able to tune in as well. Got him safely dropped off. So yeah.
And just be careful of that second one. I hear it might knock you on your butt just a little bit.
Oh, well, my arm is sore, but other than that, nothing.
Well,
We'll
I'm glad that you're getting it, and you know, that extra volunteering is always good. Okay, so that's kind of our happy notes, I believe, at this time. Karen, I'm going to ask you to do the honors and introduce Mike Smith, please.
I'll be happy to do that. Our speaker today is a graduate of the University of Guelph Ridgetown campus environmental management program, and has recently dedicated himself to raising awareness about the importance of native plants to our collective environment. After moving from a small parcel in Chatham to an acre in North Buxton in 2019, he has been documenting the process of naturalizing his property via a Facebook group called ReLeaf Chatham-Kent, which now boasts almost 700 members. The group has raised money via native tree and shrub auctions to benefit the Downey Wenjack Fund, the Buxton Museum, the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, and the Sydenham Field Naturalists. He's eager to form partnerships with like-minded community groups to further the goal of reliefing Chatham-Kent. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Smith.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm really happy to be here today. Brett, I think I wanted to kick things off with a YouTube video. In June 2019, I attended the Greening Your Grounds workshop hosted by Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority and funded by our local Rotary Club. This educational event covered various methods for incorporating stormwater management techniques into home landscaping projects, including things like how to direct rainwater from a downspout into a rain garden, and tips on how to best create wildlife habitat. One of the speakers was Larry Cornelis from Sydenham Field Naturalists. SFN is Chatham-Kent's only naturalist club, and Larry's presentation on native plant species and their incredible importance to wildlife diversity was really eye-opening for me. Larry touched on the important work of Doug Tallamy and his book Bringing Nature Home. I went home determined to replace a lot of the non-native plants in my garden and improve the quality of habitat I was providing on my property. At the time, I was living in a small house on the north side of Chatham, but I had what I thought was a fairly large garden area to fill with native plants. The first chance I got, I took a trip to a couple of the only native plant-specific nurseries in our area, Heavenly Earth near Bothwell and the Amgenung Greenhouse in Sarnia. Within a couple of weeks, I had removed all the non-native plants and filled the gardens to the brim with a sassafras tree, various sunflowers, asters, and about 20 other different native plants. Not bad for my postage stamp-sized yard. The pollinators showed up immediately. I had monarch butterflies on the milkweed, a huge variety of bees, and more moth species than I can identify. It was only a couple of weeks before I started to realize that I wouldn't have the space to do what I really wanted: restore some of Chatham-Kent's lost forest habitat. Larry's presentation had highlighted the importance of trees and shrubs, and I barely had any room left to add any more, which led me to start a search for a rural property with more room to spread out. In the fall of 2019, I moved out to North Buxton and 1.15 acres of blank slate, a wide expanse of lawn. I had LTVCA come out and make some recommendations on a restoration plan, and we decided to work towards the final goal of establishing a small forest with oak and hickory trees as the dominant canopy species. The neighboring property is fully treed, so there is a good seed bank of dogwoods, sedges, and silver maple to spread outward over the years. I was also very fortunate to connect with Mathis Natvik, who's an accomplished wildlife biologist from the Highgate area who has decades of experience with restoration projects in CK. Together, we established a multi-year plan to convert my lawn to a forest. The first step was removing some of the unwanted non-native shrubs and trees, such as Rose of Sharon and Norway spruce. Once those had been taken care of, I started to focus on selecting the list of tree species that would be planted the following spring. Many of the oak species I wanted to concentrate on were available on LTVCA's annual tree sale, so I worked with them to secure a Forest Ontario grant to supply 400 native saplings. May of 2020 was a bit of a blur. Once the trees were delivered, I would come home from work and plant trees till I lost the light. Many projects of this size plant their trees in orderly rows to make mowing and maintenance easier, but I'm a glutton for punishment and I wanted a more natural look. The 400 trees I got from LTVCA were supplemented by some larger selections from Heavenly Earth and spaced out about 7 feet apart. I determined where in the yard to plant various species based on their moisture preference. The low wet spots got a healthy dose of swamp white oak and paper birch, while slightly drier areas got red oak and shagbark hickory. Once the trees were all planted, the real work of keeping them maintained, protected from rabbits, and properly mulched started. Trust me when I say it's a full-time job to stay on top of weeding, trimming the grass, and topping up the mulch on over 500 new trees. I also experimented with a few other things over the summer. A rain garden to capture some of the roof runoff out of a downspout, using cardboard, compost, and mulch to smother the lawn to create a new milkweed garden, and digging a few pit and mound areas to recreate the natural topography of an older forest floor. This is a cool technique that simulates what happens when a tree falls over and pulls up a large area of soil with its root ball. The resulting pit holds water longer into the late spring, and the mound of soil where the tree roots break down creates a drier area. This variation in moisture levels creates microhabitats for plants that would otherwise likely not establish in a flat lawn. Going forward, the plan calls for supplementing the existing trees with new saplings from the LTVCA tree program every spring. Some trees won't survive, and others will be lost to rabbits or deer, so it's important to keep adding new trees until they establish well. I am also planning to overseed the remaining lawn with a custom wildflower and prairie grass mix that will hopefully provide benefit to pollinators until the trees create too much shade for these full sun-loving plants to do well. Early on in this process, I realized that it would be great to have a place to share ideas with other folks in the community who are interested in helping restore some of our lost natural habitat. With that in mind, I created a Facebook group called ReLeaf Chatham-Kent, which has grown well beyond what I hoped was possible and helped me connect with so many wonderful people in our community who are passionate about native species restoration. There are so many amazing new projects happening here in CK, like the Prairie Project, the Pollinator Garden, and a few ReLeaf members working on multi-acre restoration projects. Our group has participated in tree planting, invasive species removal, and hosted a lecture series that touched on forest cover and remnant prairie habitat in our region. I'm excited about the future of ReLeaf CK and seeing how we can come together to learn from each other and the land.
All right, thanks everybody. So I have a few PowerPoint slides now to go through unless anybody has any questions about the video there. That was specifically more about my project at home. The PowerPoint is a little bit more about the ReLeaf group. So I guess I could field a couple of questions on anything I've got going on at home before I dig into stuff about ReLeaf if you want.
Any questions for Mike so far? Andy?
Do you use chemicals like Roundup?
None, no. So if I'm trying to smother the grass, anything that I'm trying to get rid of, I typically would smother with cardboard or mulch, but no, there's never been any chemicals applied at all. No fertilizers or Roundup or anything like that.
That was beautiful. Thank you very much for showing us that.
Thank you.
I agree, Ashley. It's a very nice video. It's one of those videos, you know, it can keep going and keep going. It was great.
Well, yeah, and just to point out, I mean, you guys were sort of the inspiration, I guess, for all this, because the Greening Your Grounds workshop was funded by you folks. So that's what kicked me off on this whole journey. So I'll just share my screen again. I've got some PowerPoint slides now to go through. So
as you start up on that, Mike, where can we access that video again?
So I can, the YouTube link is in the chat box there, but I could email that out to the group as well if you'd like.
Good.
Yeah, if you send it to me, I'll add it on and send it out as well.
Okay. All right, and can everybody see the slide there?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So again, thank you guys for having me today. I really appreciate being here. So I'm going to start with a look back at 2020 and what we did with ReLeaf Chatham-Kent as a group. So as I mentioned in the video there, started the group, I think it was August of 2019, and it's since grown to just about 700 members now. So there's 700 members on Facebook, give or take, and there's 600 followers on Instagram. So those statistics there are from back in December of 2020, but it just shows that we have, basically for the year, we have almost over 1,200 posts in the Facebook group and 6,500 comments. So lots of good discussion on native plants going on the Facebook group. So the highlights for me, this is just sort of a quick point form list that I put together. So we had a speaker series that started pre-COVID, so we managed to get a couple in before everything got shut down. So the first speaker we had was Larry Cornelius from the Sydenham Field Naturalists. He gave us a quick talk on the forest cover in Chatham-Kent and its history, which was awesome. We have some ReLeaf Chatham-Kent t-shirts that were released. Green Drinks Chatham-Kent is basically a sort of a networking organization that we launched a Chatham-Kent chapter for in partnership with the Sons of Kent Brewery. But again, we didn't get too many in before COVID hampered our plans. Then we had another speaker series with Will Van Hemison, who's a wildlife biologist, and his talk was about remnant prairie habitat in Chatham-Kent. So remnant prairie habitat can be found in places like along railway corridors or in old cemeteries that were never plowed. It's basically places where little strips of what remained of the vast prairie habitat in Chatham-Kent, you can still find some of the plants that used to be covering about a third of our county here. We also had the Prairie Project kick off in 2020. The Prairie Project is a undertaking by one of our group members in Henry Smith Park in the south side of Chatham. So that's a third of an acre of that fairly large park that's going to be turned over to tallgrass prairie. That was seeded in the fall last year. And so looking forward to this spring and everything that comes up there. And it's going to have some signage and stuff like that for education purposes. We worked with rainbarrel.ca to have a rain barrel sale. So I believe we sold 65 units. I think that's something that you guys are also involved in typically. So that might be a cool partnership opportunity for the two of us. Maple City Homes asked us to come out and do some tree planting. So in the new subdivision that's just off of Park Ave and Bloomfield there, there's a couple hundred new houses, and we as a group, again, this was with all social distancing and stuff being observed, got some tree planting done. So a number of new houses in that new subdivision development got native trees smacked right into the center of the front yard. We had an iNaturalist project started. So iNaturalist is an app that basically allows you to record sightings of nature, basically. So we collected observations from people within Chatham-Kent. I believe those numbers are up over 700 species in that iNaturalist project. So that's kind of cool because when you collect data in there, people who are studying those species, so if you were a scientist working on studying oak tree distribution, you can use those iNaturalist observations as part of your research because they're well vetted as far as what you're observing. There's some sort of AI identification that happens in iNaturalist that makes it a pretty cool app. We had 2 native tree and shrub auctions in 2020, so one in the spring and one in the fall that were very well received. I'll get to where we donated some of that money to after. Tree tagging. So I just did this personally, a little bit of tree tagging. So I went around with some sidewalk chalk and identified some native trees in Chatham. I've got a couple of pictures in the later part of the presentation on that. Lower Thames Valley asked us to tag in for some invasive species removal in Thames Grove Park. So there was some invasive buckthorn shrubs and things. So some of the group members went in with some loppers and pulled out some big shrubs from there so that they can restore that tallgrass prairie habitat that they have in there. We're also working with Councillor Thompson on the long grass and weeds bylaw motion. So Councillor Thompson back in the fall put a motion in to have a report put together on changes that we could possibly make to our municipal long grass and weeds bylaw that would allow for naturalization projects to take place. As the bylaw is written today, it basically says that if you have any grass of any species that gets to be longer than about 8 or 10 inches, that you have to cut it down. So that's an impediment to things like the Prairie Project, where we have a municipal park that now has tall grass prairie that's going into it. So we're working with Councillor Thompson on that and some members doing some outreach and writing letters to council and things like that. We also worked with South Kent Studio. just south of Blenheim for some ReLeaf CK holiday ornaments that sold out relatively quickly. So that was pretty nice to see as well. So organizations that we've supported with donated funds. So obviously we're not anywhere on the level of you guys yet, but we definitely had some pretty good support for some of the initiatives that we had this year. So the bulk of our donations went to Downey Wenjack Fund. We also supported Buxton Museum, Buxton's NextGen, the Sydenham Field Naturalists, and both of our conservation authorities. So my plans for 2020, how are we going to keep this ball rolling considering that COVID is still amongst us? So one of the things that I'd like to see is increased advocacy and lobbying of local government in support of renaturalization initiatives. So like I mentioned about the municipal bylaw along grass and weeds, there's some other things that just need to be changed to make supporting these kind of initiatives easier. So just working with the group members to do that in a respectful way with council. Hoping to get some group tours and nature walks going when permitted by public health measures. The speaker series is going to continue. I have a couple of online folks roped in that I'm waiting to announce. And of course, when we're able to do it in person again, I'd love to do that. I'm hoping to have strong volunteer participation amongst the group in tree planting activities that are very likely to be happening throughout Chatham-Kent this year. So I'm sure most of you have probably heard that the federal and provincial governments are both very interested in supporting tree planting. There's lots of money coming down from higher levels of government. So I'm hoping that we're going to be in a position to provide the manpower to get some of these trees in the ground. Increase outreach to local organizations and businesses seeking partnerships. So that is part of today. I'm hoping to work with folks like yourselves to further our common interests in making Chatham-Kent a little bit better place to live. ReLeaf CK certified habitat signs and certificates. So this is a little idea that I have cooked up that basically is a certificate or a sign that would be issued to a person that was interested in pursuing renaturalization on their property. So at the moment, it would involve me coming out and taking a look and saying, yep, you're doing a good job, and giving you a piece of paper that says as much. But the aim would be that this would help with educating your neighbors. So often when you're kicking off these renaturalization projects, it does take some time for it to look nice. Native plants typically are on a 3-year cycle. So they will grow for a couple of years before they get big, nice flowers on them. So those first couple of years, it can look pretty scrubby, and these habitat signs are a good way to, help people understand that yes, there is some intention behind what's going on here on this property. We're hoping to have a rain barrel sale again this year. I have a couple of Miyawaki forests in the planning stages. So a Miyawaki forest is essentially a forest that is planted extremely close together. So typical tree planting projects, you would have the trees spaced out about 6 or 8 feet apart so that you could get lawnmowers between them and all that sort of stuff. In a Miyawaki forest, the plants are planted about 3 to 5 trees or shrubs per square meter. So the idea is that you simulate a old growth forest with the numbers and species mix that you plant all at once. And then all of those trees and shrubs grow up together. And while there is a little bit of competition, there's also some cooperation. So all those roots all bind together and share resources. And one of my long-term sort of maybe towards the end of 2021 goals is to obtain not-for-profit corporation status. So I've had a couple of opportunities where folks have wanted to give me some money, and I have had to say, unfortunately, I can't give you a tax receipt because this is just me essentially at this point. So I'm trying to rope some more folks that are just as nuts about this as I am into the idea of having a board and all of that sort of stuff. So that's a 2021 stretch goal for sure. Here I've got a nice little picture of the tree tagging, some of the tree tagging that I did. So this is in Tecumseh Park in one of our massive Shumard oaks, some of my favorite trees in all of Chatham-Kent. And this little slide, I just wanted to tag on at the end. I understand that you folks are going to have a presentation from Doug Tallamy in a couple of weeks, who is really what all of the folks that are sort of doing this sort of native plant stuff, most of us are drawing from his research. So some of his research is around keystone plants that support butterflies and moths. So when you're planting a tree in your front yard, if you have planted something that's non-native to Chatham-Kent, essentially there's going to be very limited numbers of things that are going to be able to make use of that plant. However, if you are planting something that is native to here, like one of those oak species at the very top, those Quercus species, any of those oak trees are going to have the ability to support roughly 450 different moth or butterfly species. So when you're thinking about, you know, all other things considered, I think it's a pretty easy choice which one you would pick if you have any kind of concern about the environment. So that is, that's what I've got for you today. Thank you very much again for having me. The link to the Facebook group is there at the bottom. I'd love to have you all join if you have some interest. And if you did want to reach me directly, you can email me at releafck@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. That part of Rotary is always working on environment stuff, and this is quite interesting. The question I always have, we walk the Rotary Eco Trail in the now O'Neill Nature Preserve, formerly Paxton's Bush, and I always like to see if there's any way we can do any improvements in there. Lower Thames, we're waiting to hear back from them, and I'm not sure what regulations have to go along with something that's called a nature preserve. But several of us quite enjoy the walks through that park. Are there any questions for Mike? We'll start with Karen.
So I have a question and a couple of comments. You mentioned Mathis Natvik, and that brought back some memories for me with United Way's Nurture the Future project. Back in 2003, we planted some trees in 2003, and we planted some more in 2004, and we tried to keep them alive in 2005. And looking back, it was a great project that we worked on. I haven't seen Mathis for a long time, but say hello when you see him the next time. We were just on a call prior to this call with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and you mentioned, Mike, as part of your presentation, walking trails, and there may be an opportunity for you to partner with the local Canadian Mental Health Association branch around what they want to do during the month of June, to get out and see some of the places that you're aware of. And so Barry, I don't know whether you want to comment on that, but I think that might be a great partnership for ReLeaf Chatham-Kent and the local Canadian Mental Health Association.
Thanks, thanks, Karen, for picking up on that. Yeah, in the last, as we're trying to scope out what we may well be doing in May and June, I went and took a look at the CK Trails map, and I did not fully appreciate that there's roughly 50 trails in Chatham-Kent. And so then there's these trails, Rotary Eco Trail being one of them. So when people are out walking these days, and by the way, it appears that some trails are getting traffic on them 10 times during COVID times as opposed to before. How might we might cross connect, I think is what you're saying, Karen, cross connect what you're talking about, Mike, over to those that are out walking on these trails.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity. I'm also a member of the Chatham-Kent Trails Council, just on my personal time. So yeah, I think for sure there's definitely a connection here. Some of our trails, or a lot of our trails, are in municipal parks, which, as I'm sure most of you are aware, it's a lot of grass, right? So I think one of the big things that we can try to talk about is how can we get some more natural spaces, sort of work outwards from surrounding the trails with natural spaces, since we've already got the trails, right? So.
Mike, I noticed as a member of the Horticultural Society, they've just sent out a friendly reminder to pay our dues, which are $10 a year, not much. And I'm wondering whether you have a membership fee for ReLeaf Chatham-Kent.
We don't, no. So really the only thing that exists right now is just the Facebook group. So if you want to join the Facebook group, you join the group. I have considered something like what you're saying, something like a membership. But again, I'd like to get, I think, to a point of where I've got sort of a not-for-profit status before I start taking people's money. So.
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate that. And thank you for the invite to this. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mike, can you give us a bit of information with regard to sale?
Sorry, it just broke up a little bit, Brett. I've got a warning about internet on my end. So can you repeat the question?
The rain barrel sale. I know our friends at Sunrise, I think, had been working on that before, but can you give us a bit of detail? You'll be starting another rain barrel sale yourself?
Sure, yeah. So there's a company called rainbarrel.ca that facilitates all this stuff. So they work with a number of different charities across the province, and they take a small cut of every sale basically for administrating and delivering and all that sort of stuff. So we work with them. We would probably work with them again. We had a positive experience for sure. So I actually have on my list of folks to reach out to is Sunrise as well. So I may be speaking with Sunrise Rotary in the next couple of weeks as well here. So, but for sure, I think a good opportunity.
Okay. And another question you also mentioned with Lower Thames, they have a tree sale in the spring. Is that something like trees on 100 basis versus maybe if we're trying to put some into a park?
Yeah, so actually the deadline for that is actually coming up quick. So it's March the 1st for the orders for that Lower Thames tree sale. The saplings are about 10 to 12 inches tall typically, and they're about $1 or $2 a piece, and they're sold in bundles of 10. So minimum order of 10 per species. So if you wanted 10 white oaks, you're looking at about $12. So it's a pretty good deal. And yeah, I take part every year now, and I typically buy a bunch of extras that I pot up and use as giveaways in the ReLeaf group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For people with smaller lots, oh, sorry, Brett?
Janet, yeah.
Thank you. Mike, for lots that maybe don't have a lot of room for trees, is there particular natural shrubs that you would recommend?
Yeah, certainly I can send a list, but there are a few shrubs on that, the list of keystone plants there that I think was the last slide. Not too many, but there's certainly a handful. Dogwood is a good one. All of the native willows. So there's a number of willows like pussy willow. Those are all great. Also blueberries, like high bush blueberries and high bush cranberries are both awesome native shrubs. But I can certainly send a list of things that I've used in my own yard if that would be helpful.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Other questions here?
Brett.
Barry?
To make pollinator gardens, please comment on the compatibility of a pollinator garden where there's a farm field right across the fence line. So where there's corn and soybeans.
Yep. So for sure, obviously something that something that we need to be aware of, being a heavily agricultural and rural community, right? So there's certainly things that you would want to put in there that would support pollinators and actually would probably aid, depending on what the crop is. I mean, if it's corn and soybeans, there's not much, pollinator activity happening. But if you had like down by Pardoeville, all those strawberries would benefit from pollinator patches along the roadsides. So you'd certainly want to make sure that you didn't have things that were going to invade the farm fields that are, resistant to the herbicides and things that they're using. But there's definitely options out there that are like prolifically floral, so they have a lot of flowers for bees, but wouldn't spread into those farm fields. So those are lists that I think are slowly being developed across the province, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but OMAFRA puts out a list of basically what are noxious weeds. That's obviously heavily agriculturally influenced, but there's a lot of things on there that folks like myself are trying to encourage people to plant. For example, milkweed would be one, right? So I think we need to find some common ground with, how do we support those pollinator patches in areas where they're appropriate, but still be cognizant of the fact that we have farmers that need to keep these things out of their fields. So that's why I think, folks like that are in urban and suburban areas have a huge part to play in this, right? One of the things that you know, I think you hear people say a lot is, you know, let's get out into nature. If you're doing some of these things at home, planting some of these plants, you're going to have nature in the backyard. So it's not necessarily a matter of getting out and going to a park. It's literally stepping out your door. And, you know, for me, I equate nature with things like bugs and birds. So on your front lawn, typically, if you've got a Norway maple and grass, there's not much for bugs and birds. So you're going to have almost a desert. You might as well have a, you know, a concrete lawn painted green for all those bugs and birds care. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to really boost up is let's get the folks in the suburban and urban areas into this so we can have them as little sort of pockets of nature, if you will.
And any other questions for Mike? So I just want to thank you very much for bringing this to us. Definitely lots there that I feel go with Rotary and the environment and things along that line. So I've got a Facebook page. I think I need to get added onto my list, and really appreciate you bringing this to us, Mike. And the name's not bad either. So. As I was telling Mike, my first name is actually Mike, but he's got a lot more hair all around than I do.
Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you. And I hope to see you, everybody in the ReLeaf group. We're happy to have you. So thank you very much.
And that was one of my questions. I forgot. So when COVID is out of the picture, you were talking about doing some tours or walks or things like that. And where would you do those at? What's your preferred area?
So one of the ones I'd really like to get out into is Clear Creek Forest. So that's actually a provincial park now. That's actually out between Ridgetown and Highgate. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful spot. And I think a lot of people aren't really aware that it's even there. So that would be one for sure that I think I would like to make more people aware of. But also, like you mentioned, we do have some stuff right in town. I think getting people over plant blindness, so not knowing necessarily a tree from a tree from a tree, and knowing that this is a maple tree, this is an oak tree, this is a red trillium, this is a white trillium. I think we have those opportunities even here in town. Like you said, the O'Neill Nature Preserve, we could get people out walking in there and identifying trees pretty quick. So I think there's lots of opportunity for sure.
Well, Brett, to make, Carol and I were out and walked the Clear Creek path sometime during this past winter. So certainly strongly vouch for that as an excellent opportunity, especially in the springtime coming up.
Oh, some of the spring wildflowers out there are just beautiful for sure.
And sorry, could you point me in the direction of Clear Creek again?
I will certainly send you a map, but it's between Ridgetown and Highgate down along the lake. So if you know where Clearville Campground is,
yeah,
it's just the parcels north of Clearville Campground, north of Talbot Trail.
Okay.
Go on the CK Trail map. You'll find it there by touching the spot.
Indeed.
Okay. I have one of those books too. Okay. Anything else? I don't think I have Julia with us today. So that concludes our meeting for this part. There is another meeting for the 100th anniversary committee coming up shortly. I'm probably going to scoot out of this office and run home, and then I'll open up the Zoom for that side of things. So thanks all for attending. Thanks very much, Mike. Really appreciate your presentation, and trust that everybody stays safe and take care. We'll see you, some of you soon.